This little box holds the key to cinematic footage from your brand new GoPro Hero 13. These are the GoPro Hero 13 ND filters, and are they actually worth your time buying these? Now, what is this cinematic motion blur?
Cinematic motion blur is the natural blur from slower shutter speeds, like 1/50th, during movement, giving film a smooth, realistic look. ND filters, camera sunglasses, reduce light, letting you keep slower shutter speeds in bright conditions to achieve that blur.
For full disclosure, GoPro did not send me these ND filters for the GoPro Hero 13, but I figured you might be thinking about getting them, so I was like, okay, I'm going to buy them. Let's see if they're any good, because that cinematic motion blur, that cinematic look is something everybody wants. So my first thought here was, let's do some amazing 4K 120. Completely just brain not working yesterday, and got a load of footage which you can see on screen. Basically put the GoPro on top of the bonnet of the car with a GoPro mount, prayed it didn't fall off, and that's the footage that we got. So there's a little bit of motion blur and all that's kind of well and good. It looks okay, and no matter what ND filter I put on, it still kind of all really looked the same. I was looking at this and I came back and I was thinking, I'm after screwing something up somewhere. Were these put on wrong? Nope, there's only one way you can put them on, and more on that in a minute, because the biggest frustrating thing I have is how these come on and come off. Of course, 4K 120, what's the point? You're not going to really get a lot of motion blur when you're slowing footage down at that high of a frame rate. That was on me. So I went back and started all over again, and the results were a little bit different. The motion blur here, as you can see, was pretty good. I was not doing any kind of super high speed or anything, and all of this was on automatic shutter, and then the motion blur was set to high, because you have two options on the motion blur, that it can be kind of, you're moving around, or then if you're going to mount it onto a tripod, or we'll say something that's static like the bonnet of the car, that's what I had it at. If you go back to, we'll say, one of the more standard modes, like the bog standard video mode that's not GP log, it looks a little bit better. But just keep that in mind. But the one good thing that I have discovered about having everything in automatic, which I'm not a big fan of, I gotta be honest, is that it works the best. The GoPro will always try and keep this 180-degree shutter rule, okay? Now, sometimes it might bump the shutter speed up slightly. Chances are you probably won't even notice, depending on what's going on in the exposure of the actual scene that you're shooting. But all that's well and good when you have it kind of stuck to a car, you've stuck to whatever, because it does give that real sensation of speed, and it is that little bit more cinematic. But for those, which I would hazard is a lot of folks will use their GoPro for vlogging, or if they're out and about and want that kind of cinematic motion blur, what happens then? Let's see, can we get this? And it's ND16. So let's see, do we have some motion blur? Motion blur. So let's go. Here's the motion blur. Is there motion blur? Is there motion blur? People think I'm crazy. Now let's take off the lens. Same settings, and there is no motion blur. People still think I'm crazy. Well, these things, surprisingly enough, work very, very well. I had this on GP log. I had it just on automatic cinematic shutter. I had it all the way as a 5.3K, and it worked really, really well. You can see with the actual ND filter on that there was that motion blur. There was no compromise to stabilization. Even when you push things where you're not supposed to push them, it worked really, really well. Now, just for the hell of it, because you really shouldn't, it should be on a static mount, I put the motion blur up to high. We're still on auto cinematic shutter, so maybe we have some more motion blur. But I would think the stabilization might kind of struggle, even though we're in a pretty good light. Depending on your audience, can be distracting. I'd hazard a guess most folks probably couldn't care less about their cinematic motion blur. But if you're a purist and you like that sensation of speed, and it's how the eye see and it's how we've been conditioned at looking at stuff on TV and cinema for a trillion years, then this is the way to actually do it. Let's talk about the most annoying thing with these. This is the GoPro Hero 13, as you can see. This is the lens. For you to get these on, you need to get the lens off, which you rotate it clockwise. I struggled, and I still struggle. I mean, look, there's an indent on my finger just from trying to push this damn thing. So the only thing I could figure out was pull it out slightly and then it will come off. Now, I didn't really read the manual, maybe it's in there, but there you go. Now, on this, you have this kind of a blue little dot, and up here, you have also a blue dot, which is all well and good. And then you get your ND filter. In this case, I'm just going to grab one out of the lovely box, which I got to say the presentation on all of this was pretty good, but are we really paying for that? And then you match up the blue dot here and you get it on, and then you twist on, but it doesn't. Anyway, what I found is because the lens is exposed, you have to be really careful because the circular part fits into the lens, and then you have to push in, and that's it. It does go on. That was the incredibly most frustrating thing I found about these. I found them painful to get on and to get off. In my experience, past GoPros, if you had to change out the lens for whatever reason, it just worked. You know, but I mean, look, this is the ND8. That has come off a little bit easier. Maybe it's... And now it's freaking stiff again. Why they couldn't have made it a magnet, I get, because, yeah, the GoPro needs to know which one is on. So it'll tell you ND8, 4, 16, 32. There's no NFC chip in it by all accounts, but it knows which one you put on, which is super useful. And it'll tell you whether you should be kind of going up an ND filter or down an ND filter when you point at where you want to actually be shooting. This is the only game in town right now if you want to get cinematic motion blur. If you have a need for them, you'll know. If you don't, you won't need these. And that's been really honest. I could just turn around and go, oh, every GoPro needs these. It doesn't. It depends on what you're shooting. And you put these on at night, forget about it, okay? Forget about it, because they're already kind of, GoPros suck anyway in low light, so the more limitations you put on the amount of light that comes into the sensor, the worse the cinematic stabilization, any stabilization is going to be. But yeah, they work, and it's not a gimmick. What's also not a gimmick is the video that's going to turn up around here. My absolute must-watch settings guide to all things video on the GoPro Hero 13. Check it out and you will be a settings ninja.